By 1880, one man controlled 90% of all the oil in America. Not some of it, 90%. His name was John D. Rockefeller. He didn't discover oil, he didn't drill for it, he just decided that everyone who did would eventually work for him, or disappear. And for 40 years, he was right. But here's what nobody tells you. When the United States government finally broke him up, after 11 years, a Supreme Court ruling, and the most expensive antitrust case in American history, it made him the richest human being who had ever lived. This is the story of how that happened, and it begins not with oil, not with Cleveland, not with a refinery or a railroad deal or a corporate trust. It begins with a con man. John D. Rockefeller was born in 1839 in Richford, New York. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, known to everyone who met him as Big Bill, was one of the more remarkable characters in 19th century America, and not in a way that reflects well on the 19th century. Big Bill was a traveling salesman who crossed rural New York and the surrounding states selling patent medicines. Bottled cures for cancer, elixirs for conditions that didn't exist, products that did nothing, sold to people who were desperate enough to believe they might work. He was charming, handsome, persuasive, and almost entirely dishonest. He was also, at various points in his life, a bigamist, maintaining two separate families in two separate states without either one knowing about the other. John grew up watching his father. And what he learned from Big Bill was not how to sell fake medicine. What he learned was something more fundamental and considerably more dangerous. He learned that in any transaction, there is the person with the information and the person without it. His father was always the person with the information. The people buying the bottles were always without it, and the person with the information always won. John decided very early that he would never be the one without the information. He would never be the customer in that transaction. He would always be the man who knew more than everyone else in the room. At 16, he left school and became a bookkeeper in Cleveland, Ohio. Where other young men his age were spending money, John was recording every penny, not just in his head, in ledgers, meticulous, obsessive, complete records of every cent that came in and every cent that went out. He saved $800. He borrowed $1,000 more from his father, at 10% interest, because Big Bill charged his own son interest on a loan. John noted it in the ledger and paid it back on schedule. He invested in a produce trading firm. It did well. He reinvested. He watched. He waited. And then, in 1859, something happened 200 miles east of Cleveland that would define the rest of his life. Oil was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania. The oil rush that followed Titusville was one of the most chaotic economic events in American history. Every young man with ambition and a shovel headed to western Pennsylvania. Fortunes were made overnight. Fortunes were lost the following morning. The landscape was a forest of wooden derricks, the air thick with the smell of crude, the roads churned to mud by wagons carrying barrels to market. It was simultaneously a gold rush and a disaster, prices swinging wildly as too many producers competed for too few buyers, driving the price of oil so low that the men pulling it from the ground were sometimes paying more to get it out than they could sell it for. Rockefeller went to Titusville once. He looked at the chaos carefully and walked away. His analysis was precise and, in retrospect, obviously correct. The drillers would destroy each other, too many of them, too little coordination, prices collapsing under the weight of their own competition. The money was not in finding oil. The money was in what happened to the oil after it came out of the ground. He went back to Cleveland and built a refinery. In 1870, Rockefeller and his partners founded the Standard Oil Company of Ohio, $1 million in capital. Rockefeller held the controlling stake. The company refined crude oil into kerosene, the fuel that lit lamps across America, that kept factories running after dark. That was as essential to daily life in 1870 as electricity is today. Standard Oil did not produce the raw material, it processed it. And in that position, and between the chaos of production and the predictability of consumer demand, Rockefeller built a machine that nobody who was watching it at the time fully understood until it was too late. The machine ran on information and leverage, and the first demonstration of how it worked came not from oil at all, but from a railroad. In 1868, before Standard Oil even existed in its final form, Rockefeller approached the Lakeshore Railroad, a subsidiary of the New York Central. He made them an offer. He would guarantee 60 full rail cars of oil every single day. In an industry defined by uncertainty and inconsistent volume, that guarantee was worth an enormous amount to a railroad that needed to plan its capacity and fill its cars. In exchange, Rockefeller wanted a discount on his shipping rates. The railroad agreed. The discount was 71%. His competitors paid full price. Rockefeller paid less than a third of what they paid to move the same barrel of oil from the same place to the same destination. From that single deal, Standard Oil's cost advantage over every competitor in the industry became almost mathematically insurmountable. They could not charge less than him without losing money. He could charge less than them and still profit. But the railroad rebate was only the beginning. What Rockefeller negotiated next is the detail that, when you understand it fully, explains how one man could control 90% of an industry in a country of 40 million people. He negotiated something called drawbacks. Not just a discount on his own shipping, a payment from the railroad for every barrel his competitors shipped on those same lines. Every time a rival oil company put a barrel on a lakeshore train, a portion of the freight charge went not to the railroad, but to Standard Oil. Rockefeller's competitors were literally paying him to compete against them. They didn't know. The railroads didn't advertise it. The arrangement was private, buried in contracts that nobody outside the deal had access to. The man with the information always wins. By 1872, Standard Oil was the largest oil refinery in the world, and Rockefeller was ready to move. What happened in Cleveland between February and March of 1872 has been called many things by the historians who have studied it. Rockefeller called it the scheme. His competitors called it the anaconda, the snake that wraps itself around its prey so slowly that by the time the pressure begins, escape is impossible. In 6 weeks, Rockefeller bought out 22 of his 26 Cleveland competitors. He did not threaten them. He did not use lawyers or legal intimidation or overt pressure. He invited them to his office and showed them his books, his costs, their costs, the gap between what he paid to refine and ship a barrel of oil, and what they paid. The arithmetic was not complicated. They could not survive competing against those numbers. The only question was whether they sold to him now, at a price that at least compensated them for what they had built, or held on until the mathematics finished them off and they got nothing. Most of them sold. The ones who didn't sell, who refused, who went to newspapers, who tried to organize resistance, found that their railroad access became unreliable. Shipments were delayed, rates changed without notice. The infrastructure they depended on began to develop unpredictable failures that somehow never seemed to affect Standard Oil. Within a decade, Standard Oil controlled 90% of all oil refining in the United States. Rockefeller was not done. In January 1882, his lawyers invented something that had never existed before in American corporate law: the trust. 40 separate companies operated under 9 trustees, functioning as a single economic entity while maintaining the legal appearance of independence. It was the first corporate trust in American history, a structure so novel that the law had no framework to challenge it, because the law had never imagined it. 90% of refining became 90% of production. The entire country ran on his product. Every kerosene lamp in every home, every factory, every city. The light itself was his. The price of kerosene fell from 58 cents a gallon to 8 cents under Standard Oil, which is the fact the company used to defend itself for decades. Prices went down. Consumers benefited. What more could anyone want? What they wanted was an economy that worked for more than one man, and a barrel maker's daughter from Pennsylvania was about to explain exactly why. Ida Tarbell grew up in Titusville. She was 14 years old when Standard Oil arrived in Pennsylvania and began doing to the independent producers what it had already done to Cleveland. Her father, Franklin Tarbell, was a barrel maker, a man whose livelihood depended directly on the independent oil producers that Rockefeller's machine was systematically absorbing or destroying. The family watched the businesses around them collapse. The community that had built itself on the oil rush watched its independence dismantled, methodically, company by company. Tarbell left Titusville. She became a journalist. She built a reputation over years of careful, rigorous, documented work. And in 1892, she began investigating Standard Oil. Not as a personal vendetta. She was disciplined enough to understand that personal anger makes for worse journalism, not better. She approached Standard Oil the way a scientist approaches a subject, requesting documents, interviewing former employees, tracking down railroad contracts, subpoenaing records, following paper trails through shell companies and holding structures that had been deliberately designed to obscure what they contained. She spent 5 years. Between 1902 and 1904, McClure's magazine published her findings as a 19-part series titled The History of the Standard Oil Company. It became the most widely read piece of journalism in America. It was read aloud in the chambers of Congress. Theodore Roosevelt, who had been looking for both the evidence and the political opportunity to move against the trusts, read every word. What Tarbell documented was not rumor or allegation, it was the system itself, laid bare. The railroad rebates, the drawbacks, the Cleveland massacre and how it had been conducted, the network of informants Standard Oil maintained to monitor competitors' shipments, the documented pattern of how independent businesses across America had been identified, pressured, and eliminated by a company that controlled the infrastructure everyone depended on. Rockefeller's response when the series began to generate national attention was to call her Miss Tarbell. He refused to be interviewed. He said she had gotten her facts wrong. He never specified which ones. The articles became a book. The book became the foundation of the largest antitrust case in American history. In 1906, Theodore Roosevelt's administration filed suit against Standard Oil under the Sherman Antitrust Act. The charge was illegal restraint of trade, the railroad deals, the drawbacks, the systematic use of market power to eliminate competition. The case was the most complex corporate litigation the American legal system had ever attempted. It took 5 years to reach the Supreme Court. During his testimony, Rockefeller was 67 years old. He sat in the witness chair and was asked hundreds of questions about deals he had personally negotiated, meetings he had personally attended, decisions he had personally made. He claimed to remember almost nothing. Hundreds of questions, hundreds of variations of the same answer. He could not recall. He did not recollect. He was not certain. He was, in this respect, very much his father's son. Big Bill had spent a career knowing exactly what he knew and exactly how much to reveal of it. John had spent a lifetime doing the same thing, with considerably more at stake. On May 15, 1911, the United States Supreme Court ruled unanimously. Standard Oil was guilty of monopolistic practices in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. It must be immediately dissolved. The empire of 40 companies, built over 40 years, controlling 90% of American oil, was to be broken into 34 separate entities. The trust that Rockefeller's lawyers had invented in 1882, the first of its kind, the template for every corporate consolidation that followed, was declared illegal and dismantled by order of the highest court in the land. The world assumed it was over. Rockefeller was 72 years old. His life's work had been ruled a crime. The government had taken 40 years of construction and ordered it destroyed. The man who had controlled 90% of American oil now had shares in 34 separate companies instead of one unified empire. Everyone assumed he had lost. Everyone was wrong. Here is what actually happened when Standard Oil was broken up, and here is why it is the most counterintuitive outcome in the history of American business. The 34 companies that emerged from the dissolution were, individually, free. Free from the legal constraints of the trust structure. Free to grow in ways that the trust had actually prevented, because the trust, by consolidating everything under a single legal entity, had suppressed the individual stock valuations of the companies inside it. Investors had been buying shares in Standard Oil as a whole. Now they could buy shares in 34 separate companies, each one with its own growth story, its own management, its own ability to expand. The share prices of the 34 companies, once they were free to trade individually on the open market, rose rapidly. The capital that had been locked inside the trust structure was now visible and accessible. Investors poured in. Rockefeller owned shares in all 34 of them. His net worth did not fall after the breakup, it accelerated. By 1913, his personal wealth had reached $900 million, approximately 3% of the entire United States GDP, a number that, converted to today's terms using various economic measures, falls somewhere between $400 billion and $1 trillion, depending on the methodology. Numbers at that scale stop being comparable to anything we have a practical framework for understanding. In 1916, John D. Rockefeller became the first American billionaire in history. The government had spent 11 years and the full weight of its antitrust authority attempting to break him. The names of the companies that emerged from that breakup are, a century later, some of the most recognizable in the world. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil. Standard Oil of California became Chevron. Standard Oil of Indiana became Amoco. The empire the government dismantled is, in its component parts, still running. The man who said competition is a sin was brought down by competition law and rewarded, extraordinarily, by the very competition he had spent 40 years describing as sinful. Rockefeller's story is told in most versions as a morality tale, the robber baron, the monopolist, the man who crushed competition and had to be stopped by the government. All of that is accurate. The railroad deals were genuinely predatory. The drawbacks, charging competitors for the privilege of competing against him, were a level of ruthlessness that the legal system eventually decided it could not allow. But the morality tale misses the operational lesson, the one that every company that has achieved dominance in the century since has absorbed, whether they admit it or not. Rockefeller didn't own the oil, he owned the pipes, he owned the refineries. He owned the transportation infrastructure that every barrel of oil in America had to pass through on its way from the ground to the consumer. He understood, earlier and more completely than anyone around him, that in any industry, the money is not in the raw material. The money is in the infrastructure through which the raw material must travel. The drillers in Titusville who got rich on discovery lost it on the price war that followed. Rockefeller watched that happen and went back to Cleveland to build a refinery because he understood that whoever processes and moves the oil will always have more leverage than whoever finds it. The railroad rebates were not just a cost advantage, they were a structural lock, a way of embedding Standard Oil into the infrastructure of the industry so deeply that dislodging it required an act of the Supreme Court. And even that didn't fully dislodge it. It just reorganized it. Every corporate playbook used today has his fingerprints on it. The trust structure, the strategic acquisition of competitors before they become threats, the negotiation of infrastructure access as a competitive weapon, the separation of the glamorous visible part of an industry from the unglamorous essential part, and the decision to own the unglamorous part, because that is where the real control lies. He didn't own the oil, he owned the pipes. And whoever controls the infrastructure controls everything built on top of it. That lesson is older than Standard Oil. It will outlast every company operating today. The only question worth asking, in any industry, at any moment, is the one a bookkeeper from Cleveland asked in 1859, while everyone else was heading to Pennsylvania with shovels. Who controls what has to happen after? If this video changed how you see the industries around you, who owns the infrastructure, who controls the pipes, share it. And if you want to keep following the people who built empires and the systems that made them possible, subscribe to the Boardroom Files, because there are more of these stories.
This is the Boardroom Files, where empires rise, scandals break, and the truth is always in the fine print.